Finding Home by Sapphire. Chapter 13. To When Winning Feels Like Losing. It's closing up! Great job, guys! These Chitauri must need an open link to the mothership or something. They're dropping like flies. Looks like we'll only have cleanup to worry about. Cleanup? Are you kidding me? Let's just not come in tomorrow. Let's just take it a. Have you ever tried shawarma? There's a shawarma joint about 2 blocks from here. I don't know what it is, but I want to try it. We're not exactly finished yet, Stark. There's still the Tesseract and Loki. Thor, what's your status up there? Thor? Potter, do you read? When an ear-shattering roar of unrestrained rage split the air of Manhattan, every single Avenger made for Stark Tower as fast as they could go. They all knew something had gone very, very wrong. Thor barely remembered helping Eric back on flat ground, his eyes glued to the weakly struggling figure pinned against the Tesseract device. He barely even noticed Loki, so still he might have been a statue if the stunned expression on his face hadn't been so real. He most definitely didn't see the Chitauri dropping to the ground all around them. Hurry, he managed as he dropped to a crouch beside the wizard. His hands hovered helplessly over the scepter now embedded in Harry's chest. The barrier around the Tesseract faded within seconds as the mechanic abruptly slumped forward, no longer held up in a mockery of an upright position. Thor didn't know what was worse as he lowered him onto the ground, careful not to jostle the weapon and aggravate the wound. "Loki, do something!" he demanded urgently. He didn't have the first notion about how to heal, but Loki had done it before, had actually been quite adept at it too. "Loki!" His brother started a little, looking the most uncertain Thor had ever seen him, before his gaze dropped down to the injury. "There is nothing I can do," Loki said flatly. "This injury is fatal. It has punctured a lung and hit his heart as well." His jaw worked for a moment, but no words came out. Thor could do nothing but stare. "But he will..." he started weakly. A heavy thud behind them caught their attention, and they both tensed when they caught sight of the Hulk standing only a few feet away. "Banner," Thor started, and he wasn't sure if his throat was tight with relief or dread. "Banner," he tried again. "Please change back. Perhaps you could try..." The Hulk took a ground-shaking step forward, and Thor rose to his feet, quickly summoning Mjolnir. Harry was dying. There was no denying that, but if the Hulk lost control here in the center of the city, they might as well have lost the fight against the Chitauri. "Banner, calm down," Thor cautioned as the Hulk took another step forward, dark eyes focused on Harry's form. One last step, and Thor could actually see something snap in the Hulk's eyes, turning his expression from frighteningly calm to terrifyingly incensed in the span of a heartbeat. "Loki, take care of him!" Thor just had time to shout as the Hulk released a heart-stopping bellow and charged forward, features rapid. Thor met him halfway, crashing into Banner's monster form and forcing them off the balcony, disappearing downwards and through to the bottom floors. "Take care of him! How was he supposed to do that? Loki had a hard enough time taking care of himself." He glanced down at the injury again and forced away the storm of confusion trying to cloud his mind. Involuntarily, his hands found the place where the weapon entered body and pushed a wave of his own magic into it, trying to keep the damage from spreading. "Leave it," a voice rasped, and Loki's eyes shut up to meet pained green. "You will die," he said bluntly. He didn't know what to make of the bitter laugh that escaped this man. Harry, a part of his mind still functioning properly, reminded. That was what his brother had called him, but it quickly turned into a wet cough that spilled bright red over his lips and sent a sliver of ice straight into Loki's heart. "Wonder if I'll make it this time," was the slurred reply. Loki honestly had no response for that. "Do not be foolish," he retorted instead, sending more magic into the wound and trying not to notice how the blood stained his hands. "I thought you were better than this. You had me believe you to be superior to average humans." A ragged breath. "Nah, I'm just as average as the rest." Loki pressed down unconsciously around the wound at this, easing just as swiftly when Harry made a pained sound. "You humans have doctors for this sort of thing, do you not?" he demanded. "Science where magic will not suffice. I will not accept your death, warrior. My debt to you is yet to be paid, and I always pay my debts." He heard another crash behind him and muttered something derogatory under his breath as he looked around. And instead of retrieving aid, my dear brother and that mindless beast decided to brawl. I am surrounded by incompetents. Another shaky laugh found itself out into the open. You remind me of a man I once knew. Called everyone dunderheads, couldn't stand it when people didn't catch on as quickly as he could. Sounds to be an intelligent man for a human. Loki carefully ignored the long pauses now punctuating Harry's words, still looking around. His gaze landed on Eric Selvig, and he scoffed when the scientist shrank back just a little. Go acquire help immediately, human, he ordered with a sneer. As you can see, he is in need of assistance. No, it's all right, Harry called out as loudly as he could. It's all right, Dr. Selvig. I know you injured your leg, don't bother. Loki didn't know who to glare at, so he settled for pitting a resentful stare at the old man while directing his harsh questions at Harry. You wish to die, warrior? Were you not the one who told me to give life a chance? Are you such a hypocrite? Harry's answer was lost in the whine of a familiar weapon charge, and Loki's head snapped around to find Iron Man hovering directly behind him, palm repulsor extended and pointed straight at Loki. Strangely enough, moving away wasn't even a thought that crossed his mind, so it was lucky someone else intervened just in time. Stark! Captain America appeared, tackling Iron Man out of the air and forcing his arm upward so that the shot the laser fired became harmless. You heard Thor. He's on our side. They were all pretty sure Tony hadn't heard. Let go of me. In contrast to his usually loud behavior, Tony's voice was dangerously soft at the moment as he struggled violently to throw Captain America off. Let go right now. I'm gonna kill him, you hear me? He's as good as dead. Let go! Let go right now! With a tremendous heave, the billionaire threw the captain off and was instantly on his feet again, surging forward with deadly intent, and Loki didn't need to see the man's face to feel the murderous rage seeping out from behind the armor. Stark, calm down! And suddenly Hawkeye and Black Widow were there, wrestling Tony to the ground as Steve picked himself up from the remains of the penthouse. I've got him. The captain took Hawkeye's place, fighting to restrain Tony, who was now swearing up a storm. You've got metal glue experience, right? Harry, Clint was already moving away, dropping his bow with careless abandon as he crouched down next to Harry. Move a bit, he said curtly to Loki, stomach twisting when he realized that the weapon had gone straight through the wizard. Unconscious. Was you awake before? At Loki's nod, Clint grimaced and felt for Harry's pulse, weak and thready. Ignoring the loud crashes of the Hulk and Thor fighting, Clint turned to the scuffle occurring only a few feet away. Stark! He barked over the large range of curses Tony was spitting. Stark! He's dying! I'm no certified doctor! What Potter needs right now are a hospital and a surgeon! You're the billionaire! Call someone! Tony stopped struggling so abruptly that Steve and Natasha cracked heads as their momentum threw them forward. Jarvis! Tony's voice was hoarse and not too steady. Jarvis called the Presbyterian. Told them if they don't have a surgeon ready by the time I get there, I'll tear the place down myself. I have already done so, sir. Jarvis's smooth voice answered. They are preparing as we speak. Shaking his teammates' loosened hold off him, Tony was at Harry's side in an instant, flipping his visor up and unceremoniously shoving Loki out of the way. You cannot move him. Loki cautioned that Tony glared at the demigod with every bit of contempt he could muster. Alien invasion he could forgive. He had never been big on patriotism. That was Cap's job, though he obviously wouldn't stand aside as the world went down the drain. But if this psycho ruler of the earth wanted to be killed, the only friend he had, intentional or no, Tony was going to make sure there wasn't enough pieces left of him for even the son of a bitch's father to recognize. Then stabilize him, he hissed instead. Do your magic voodoo and let me take him to the hospital. Loki only hesitated for a moment, and that was already a moment too long in Tony's book, before pressing bloodied hands to Harry's injury again. A blue glow shot around the wound and the staff before one of the demigod's hands extended and swiftly removed the scepter. The cry that tore from Harry's throat made Tony jerk forward, hands hovering helplessly over the mechanic as he remained unaware. Was that really necessary? Tony snapped. Loki gave him a cursory glance. You asked me to stabilize the wound. This is impossible. He is too far gone. I am freezing the area instead for approximately 5 minutes. Get him to the hospital within that time or he will die. No one voiced the fact that Harry could very well die anyway, as Tony scooped the mechanic up and took off at full speed, thrusters at maximum, as he raced to the hospital. "So what the hell happened?" Steve asked, looking to Loki as Natasha helped a shaken Eric Selvig to his feet and escorted him away from the balcony. "And does anyone have a tranquilizer?" Below them, furious roars and shouts punctuated the air amidst the loud crashes inside Stark Tower. "None that would affect the Hulk," Clint sighed, absently rubbing at a patch of blood on the back of his hand. He didn't know Harry all that well, but the wizard had saved his life, and it just wouldn't sit well with him if he went and died now. Well, he'll tear all of Manhattan apart if we don't stop him. Steve glanced down and just managed to catch the two figures of his teammates still wrestling around. "Thor seems to have a pretty good handle on Banner right now," Natasha interjected, "and the rest of the city's gone underground, so let's just leave him to it at the moment. I want to know what happened here. I thought Loki was supposed to lead the scepter to the cube." She ended with an accusing look at the demigod. Loki stared coolly back. The Chitauri led a small platoon here and fired off shots. Several caught the balcony. Dr. Selvig fell, and my brother went after him. I was not paying attention when the scepter broke through your warrior's magic, and he pushed me out of the way. "He saved you!" Clint stared in disbelief. "Why?" Loki didn't glare, but he gave off an air of sullen irritation, snapping back. "How should I know? The workings of your human minds are beyond me." A slightly stilted silence followed as Clint turned away with an angry huff, picking up his bow in the process. He had not forgiven Loki for playing with his mind, and even if the demigod was on their side now, he still couldn't understand why Harry would sacrifice himself like that. "Let's just go to the hospital," Natasha finally suggested weakly. "Shield will handle this," she gestured at the mess around them, "and we need to find a way to calm the Hulk." Banner always seemed calmer around Harry, Steve recalled. Maybe his magic had something to do with it. They all jumped when Thor crashed back onto the balcony, shaking it precariously as he skidded to a stop near the edge. "Thor!" Steve took a step forward, only to stop when the Hulk literally burst through the floor of the penthouse, expression feral. Releasing a howl, the Hulk charged as Thor hauled himself up again and flung his hammer at it, throwing the green beast back. "Run!" Thor shouted, but none of them could fly, and they were on the edge of a several 100-foot drop. There was nowhere to run. "Give me your quiver," Loki suddenly spoke up, hand extending to Clint. Clint glared at him. "Then what are you gonna do? Shoot him? Sorry to disappoint you, but my arrows don't work on the Hulk." "No, you asinine human," Loki shot back with annoyance. "But I can sense your warrior's magic and your weapons, and your captain over there is the one who mentioned its calming effect. Throw it to the beast unless you want all of us to die right here." Clint blinked before hastily removing his quiver. Would wonders never cease? Loki was actually trying to help them. "Throw it here!" Clint tossed it to Thor, who quickly slid it over to the Hulk. He winced when the entire thing was flattened under the Hulk's foot. But just when he thought their gamble had failed, it came to an abrupt halt. Still growling, still untamed, but unmoving. "Is it working?" Natasha whispered, her gun held in front of her. They all backed up a few paces when the Hulk took another step towards them. But it seemed to be struggling now, as if Banner had regained a footing and was fighting for control now. And then, with an enraged roar, the Hulk turned and stormed away, crashing into furniture and debris as it headed further into the building and out of sight. They could hear its bellows lessen, decreasing in volume, before ceasing altogether, leaving a ringing silence around them as it fell silent at last. "Okay," Steve breathed out in a sigh of relief. "All right, Romanov, get S.H.I.E.L.D. down here for cleanup. Barton, go get the chopper and come pick us up. Thor, you take care of Loki and the Tesseract. Dr. Selvig, just stay put until the jet gets here. Don't want to break that leg. I'll take care of Banner." The team, weary from war, but still high on adrenaline, separated to their tasks, trying not to think about the wizard. Now practically one of their own after the chaotic conflict, was still fighting his own battle miles away in an emergency room. "How is he?" Tony looked up at Natasha's voice, managing a half shrug before looking back down again. He had removed his suit, which was packed away again into a scratched suitcase by his feet. "Still touch and go," he replied, voice monotonous. "Where's Thor?" "Accompanying the Tesseract and Loki back to the helicarrier," Clint reported, taking a seat next to Tony. Natasha sat down next to him, and Steve and Bruce both took up a portion of wall to lean against. Tony arched his eyebrows briefly in acknowledgement before glancing over at Bruce. Back with us then, big guy? Guess I'm gonna have to completely rebuild Stark Tower after this, huh? He offered a weak smile but dropped it when Bruce just looked down at the floor. Nobody said anything more for the next 20 minutes. The clock's second hand ticking by with annoying consistency until even Barton snapped and hurled an arrow at it, cracking the plastic and sending the clock to the ground. The nurses who witnessed this took one look at their grimy apparel and grim expressions and pretended not to notice. Finally, the light above the ER blinked off, and every Avenger surged to their feet as the doctor came out to meet them. On hindsight, the grave lines on the surgeon's face was all the answer anyone needed, yet every one of them waited with bated breath as the man opened his mouth. I'm sorry, the doctor told them regretfully. We tried everything we could, but the injury was too deep, and it lost too much blood. The weapon went straight through his left lung and part of his heart as well. He bled out before we could repair even part of the damage. Stunned silence greeted his statement. The doctor looked around uneasily as Steve turned away, leaning an arm against the wall and resting his forehead against it. Bruce simply buried his face in his hands, fingers tightening in his hair until his knuckles were white. Natasha looked down at her lap, hands clasped together as Clint curled an arm around her shoulders, his own features blank as he frowned hard at the far wall. It was Tony who spoke first, taking an almost wavering step forward. That's not possible, he insisted, and the desperation in his eyes had even the doctor looking away. Harry's he's strong. He wouldn't just... The billionaire stopped, mouth opening and closing, but nothing came out. He finally swallowed and looked around, taking in the pity everyone seemed to be directing at him. I'm sorry, Mr. Stark, the surgeon said sympathetically. And that was the last straw. Making an abrupt turn, Tony strode straight out of the hospital, feeling numb as he made his way out through the white hallways, ignoring the distantly alarmed voices calling after him. He needed to get away. He couldn't stand another minute suffocating in a place so full of death. Thor's going to want to know, Steve said tiredly as they thanked the doctor for trying. And a funeral, I guess. Doctor. Bruce had risen to his feet, jaw clenched in restrained anger, but his voice was clear when he spoke. I'll tell him. Does anyone have a... He trailed off when Clint produced a phone, dialing a number before handing it over. That's the director's number, Clint informed him. If Thor's still there, Fury can get a hold of him. Bruce nodded his thanks and headed outside as well. He needed some fresh air to clear his head, or clear it as much as he could. The foil for his anger was no longer alive, after all. Thor, call for you. Thor turned from his brother, who was currently sitting in a cell with unspoken indifference, and warily accepted the communication device from Fury. It's Banner, the director said with a shrug. He didn't say what about. Are any of you gonna give me a full report on what happened anytime soon? Thor just brought the phone up and turned away from Fury, ignoring the annoyed sigh this got from the director and waiting until he vacated the room again before speaking, absently noting the way Loki had leaned forward, eyes much more intent now. Banner, Thor greeted. What news do you bring? He's dead, Bruce told him, and Thor felt as if he had swallowed Mjolnir. His brother must have read the answer on his face because Loki's shoulders slumped instantly, though his face smoothed over into an expressionless mask. I see. Thor closed his eyes for a moment. He had lost comrades before, and it never got any easier, but Harry's death somehow seemed worse. After all, he had been there. He had been right there, only a few steps away, and if he had been just a second faster, if he had summoned his hammer just a heartbeat sooner, would Harry still be dead? Thor, you can't blame yourself for this, Bruce said from the other end. It's just one of those things that happen because it's war. People die in war. Thor swallowed. Yes, he knew that. He had been in plenty of battles himself, and his father had taught him as much, but it didn't stop it from hurting any less. He drew in a fortifying breath and thought back to the conversations he had had with Harry, the suspicions that had been piling up for some time now, and the chance he had been thinking of taking ever since Harry had fallen. If he was wrong, quite a few people would be upset with him for giving them false hope. But if he was right, he owed it to himself to try, or he would forever question his decision in this matter.
Banner,
Thor said urgently, and caught Loki's frown as his brother heard the purpose in his voice.
leave the body. Do not allow a burial to take place.
What? What are you talking about? The captain's gone to make preparations already.
Then stop him,
Thor instructed.
Henry might still make it.
There was a long pause on the other end. Thor, Harry's dead. He's not going to come.
He might,
Thor said bluntly.
Please, trust me on this.
Another contemplative silence fell before a resigned sigh echoed down the line. Fine. I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
Thor closed the device and met Loki's wide-eyed stare. I know of no race that can rise from the dead, brother, Loki murmured quietly.
Perhaps,
Thor acknowledged.
But I should think you would realize by now that you do not know everything.
I don't suppose you'd be kind enough to just let me move on, Harry asked, conversationally. Death stared back coolly, looking almost amused.
A futile thought, since mortal you are not.
Harry sighed deeply and fell back onto his back on the bench. It was King's Cross all over again, but there was no train forward, just one ready and waiting to take him back.
You no longer wish to live?
Death asked in a mild tone, somehow sitting in the air.
Is that not somewhat counterproductive?
Harry shot him a flat stare.
I will never see my mother or father or Sirius or Remus ever again. I'm cursed to watch the world go by as everyone I have ever cared about grows old and dies. What kind of existence is that?
A higher form,
Death informed him calmly.
What use are bonds to the world of men when compared to you they are merely ink from pen, faded with time as they pass their prime, and when death comes to call, not but memories remain of them all.
They may mean only that much to you, Harry said bitterly, but not to me. It's just plain cruel to keep me alive like this.
Death laughed as it repeated,
Death is honest, death is fair, but kindness, that I do not care.
Yeah, no kidding, Harry scoffed, staring up at the ceiling.
And what if I offer a way?
Death mused aloud, the glint in its eyes sharpening when Harry involuntarily jerked up.
To see your loved ones day after day. If I give you the dead and they stay at your side, will you agree to your fate and take it all in your stride?
You could give me back Sirius? And Remus?
Harry couldn't help but blurt out, heart pounding.
I could see my parents.
Death just grinned, sly and dark, before sweeping a hand behind him, and Harry almost fell off the bench when the familiar form of his godfather, tall and handsome and younger by far than Harry had ever seen him in life. With his hands in his pockets and a grin on his face, Harry's heart ached as he stared at the much-missed figure of Sirius Black.
Sirius!
He stumbled to his feet and staggered forward, not quite believing his eyes. How? He half glanced back at Death, not daring to take his eyes off his godfather.
How was he?
A visit,
Death said smoothly, but there was a hard edge to its voice that hadn't been there before, and it had dropped the playful rhymes it usually spun as it talked.
Did you forget, young master? You possess the resurrection stone. As part of your magical core, you do have the ability to bring back the dead. Your deceased godfather is simply a shade at the moment, much like how he was during the final battle when you recalled him to your side. But with the stone... Its voice darkened. With the stone, your power would be immense. With the stone, you could bring him back right here, right now.
And just for a moment, Harry wanted to believe. To believe that it was this simple, that as the Master of Death, raising the dead would be no problem, that he would get Sirius and Remus back, and he would get his parents back. He could live forever if his loved ones were beside him. But Harry stopped just short of Sirius's now open arms, searching the welcoming smile on his godfather's face and swallowing hard once before forcing himself to turn away.
What are you doing?
Death asked.
Do you not wish to greet your godfather? Is he not what you want?
What I want,
Harry said in a near whisper.
What I want is to live a good life, and die a good death. What I want is to see my family again, my real family, not the shadow of one. Notice.
Death's expression was cold.
He is your godfather's shade. A single touch would bring him back, and he would be yours.
My godfather's shade, Harry repeated, shaking his head and taking another step away from the apparition behind him. But I don't want a shade, nor do I want a living shade. That's not Sirius. Sirius loved me, that's true. There was a time when he loved me more than anything else in the world, which is why that is not him. The real Sirius would never want me to bring him back, no matter how much I wanted it, or he wanted it. Truly raising the dead isn't impossible, you told me yourself. And Death is honest, didn't you say? He's at peace now, and it would be wrong to drag him back. Don't use my emotions to try and trick me. I won't fall for that. Death stared at him long and hard, and it was several seconds before Harry sensed the shade's disappearance. It took everything he had to ignore the pain now gripping his heart at seeing his godfather's face.
You are a strange one, Death said. I will not release you from your duties as my master. You have the option of walking the mortal world alone, or walking it with the shades of your lost loved ones. Your decision.
Harry took a deep breath to pull himself together before looking Death straight in the eye. I promised you a long time ago, when you first came to me and told me of my role, that I would never use the resurrection stone for any purpose at all. He tilted his chin out in a defiant gesture. I stand by my word, so you can take your options and stuff it. It looks like I only have one choice, after all. And with that said, he wheeled around and stalked off towards the black train waiting on the tracks. If he had the choice of suffering or watching his loved ones suffer in his stead, he'd rather live alone, because the latter would only make him suffer more. Stepping onto the train, Harry didn't see the smile on Death's face, no longer horrible or cruel, but approving above all.
One test you have conquered, 2 more to go.
It murmured to himself.
Oh, master, my master, how long until you know?
Harry couldn't be dead. He just couldn't be. Who was Tony supposed to go out for drinks with if the mechanic was dead? Whose house would he stay in when he just wanted to get away from Stark Tower for a while? He would have nobody to go to if Harry was dead. Which was why when he finally picked up Bruce's 10th call to his cell, Tony immediately pulled all the stops, paying off the hospital staff left and right to keep their mouths shut, closing down Stark Industries on the account of renovations, phoning Pepper to tell her to stay in D.C. on the pretense that he wanted the whole fiasco to blow over first, and ignoring any and all calls Fury or Coulson or any other S.H.I.E.L.D. member made, reinforcing Stark Tower with every technological defense he and Jarvis could think of until it was probably easier to break into the president's White House in broad daylight, stark naked, and through the front door on a Wednesday morning than it was to put a toe inside his tower. And then he proceeded to monitor Harry's condition day in and day out, ignoring the other Avengers' attempt to let them take over for a few hours. After all, Harry could wake up any moment. Tony had to be there. It's been a week, Steve said flatly. This is ridiculous. We need to tell the director and get a move on with the funeral before Stark does something drastic. This is killing him. It had been a week since the battle against the Chitauri. The entire team had holed up in what remained of Stark Tower, each running interference with Fury and the rest of S.H.I.E.L.D. every time the director asked for a report on the fight. Harry's body had been placed in an empty observation room in one of the labs, and Tony had barely left it since Thor had insisted on keeping the entire thing quiet. Clutching at straws and not able to ignore the desperation on Tony's face, the Avengers had agreed, some more reluctant than others, but they had banded together, paid off any hospital staff that wouldn't remain silent, and spent the last week walking back and forth through the halls of Stark Tower waiting for a miracle. The only reason no one had given up earlier was because Harry's body, injury stitched up and cold, was not decaying. It was as if someone had placed it in stasis. At least let the body start decaying first, Bruce objected. You suggest that to him right now when it looks like he's still alive? He's not breathing, Natasha pointed out, and he'll lose it. Bruce continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. Humans decay when they die. Maybe wizards don't, Clint muttered. And there are no exceptions.
Bruce said doggedly. We know Harry's magic doesn't work anymore. Your arrows don't produce fire anymore, and we even checked Harry's place. The safe house is gone, so it can't be his magic keeping his body in stasis. And a wizard without magic is just as human as the rest of us, so his body should be decaying, but it's not. We leave him. Doctor, are you sure you're not just grasping at straws? Steve asked wearily, running a hand through his hair. If he can come back, why hasn't he yet?
Perhaps it takes time.
Thor cut in. The demigod looked tired, having run himself ragged, splitting his time between Harry, Loki, the Tesseract, and Selvig, and his attempts at making a device that would work in tandem with the cube to transport himself and Loki back to Asgard. But a week? Natasha questioned doubtfully. Surely he would have... Guys! Tony's voice cut the air and they all turned to look at the open doorway that led to Harry's observation room. Guys, get in here! There was a moment where nobody moved, frozen to the ground as Hope warred with disbelief because that hadn't heard Tony sound so alive since the hospital, and then there was a stampede for the door, most of them getting stuck in the doorway as they tried to shove through all at once until Natasha huffed an annoyed breath and, being the slimmest of them all, managed to duck down and wiggle through, leaving the men to fight their way in. Stark? Natasha came to a stop next to the billionaire who was leaning over the monitor attached to the wizard. Her eyes widened when he moved aside. There was a heartbeat! Are you serious? She whispered before seizing a thin wrist and scrambling for a pulse. And there it was, faint but steady, as if Harry was slowly coming back. And as the others assembled around the bed, they watched in amazement as Harry's chest began to move, slow and uneven at first before steadying, and they almost jumped when green eyes fluttered open, dazed and confused, but very much alive. Harry? Tony whispered, leaning over the mechanic. Harry, can you hear me? It took a few seconds, but soon enough, Harry managed to focus on Tony's haggard features. Where am I? He mumbled. Tony released a relieved laugh that was almost a sob as the others fell into the chairs around the room, boneless with gratification as they slouched in their seats. You're at Stark Tower, Tony told him. You know, you didn't need to go and die on me to get a free pass in here. I've been trying to get you to come over for months. Harry offered a vague smile, so Tony assumed that Harry was still adjusting to, well, being alive again. You could have told me wizards could come back to life, Tony continued at a fast babble, not noticing the shadows surfacing briefly in Harry's eyes at those words. I would have been a lot less worried. Not that we weren't all worried. We were, very. But Thor was the one who guessed you might come back, so we've kept you hidden for a week. A week? Harry's hoarse rasp interrupted him. Tony blinked. Yeah. You've been dead for a week. Oh. Harry shifted a little. It wasn't that long last time. Last time? Bruce jumped in, one hand resting against Harry's wrist, as if reassuring himself that the wizard was indeed alive. Not before, Harry said tiredly. Only took a few minutes to come back then. You were killed before? Natasha frowned worriedly. Harry quirked a humorless smile at her. You could say that. Anyone still coming after you? The female agent pressed, fingering a gun. I could discourage them. Harry actually managed to chuckle at that. No, don't worry. It's in the past. He coughed a little before struggling into a sitting position. Tony and Bruce immediately helped him up, cranking up the bed to support him. So, did we win? Harry looked around. Yeah, Steve nodded, pulling his chair closer. The portal closed, the Chitauri dropped like flies, and the Tesseract is inactive again. Fury's going crazy because all of us keep avoiding him or refusing to give him a straight answer about the battle, and he doesn't know about you being dead and everything, by the way. Oh, and Loki's in S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. Harry jerked a little and found Thor's gaze. What? Thor shook his head. The director has agreed to let me take both Loki and the Tesseract back to Asgard. He will face our father there. He paused and then offered a smile. I believe he will be glad to hear of your revival. Harry nodded silently. He had a feeling Thor wouldn't let anything too bad happen to Loki. But enough of that! Clint peered at him curiously. How did you come back to life? Can all wizards do that? Are there certain circumstances to it, or are you immortal? The gazes around him became expectant, and Harry averted his gaze to a blanket laid out over his lap. What could he say? This was the perfect opportunity to confess everything, to tell them about being the master of death and of the curse it brought. But to what end? He knew Tony well enough now that he could foresee the billionaire throwing himself into pointless research to try and find a way out for him, and he had a feeling Bruce would probably join him. It wouldn't be fair to either man because Harry knew they would never rest until they found a cure, but this wasn't something mere science could fix. Not even magic could fix it. And both Natasha and Clint were, at the very least, contract bound to inform S.H.I.E.L.D. of Harry's status. It was a miracle they hadn't told Fury about his temporary death, but it was too much to hope that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents would keep something as big as this from him as well. Steve could probably be convinced to keep quiet about it, but Harry didn't know the captain well enough yet to place absolute faith in him. He didn't want to risk it, and the last thing he wanted was to perform a memory charm on the super soldier. Thor would probably understand. Hell, the demigod would take it in stride and probably invite him to Asgard in the process, but Harry would have to decline. As much as he hated the prospect of spending the rest of eternity in the land of the living, Earth was his home, and he could never just leave it. And he still had his garage here, and his cars, and he'd miss Tony more than he would admit if he left. And now that he remembered, this could actually be a major problem in a few years' time when he had to leave. But underneath it all was the gut-wrenching fear of getting too close. If he didn't say anything now, if he backed off from telling the truth, he would essentially be putting a lie between them all, and that would be distance. Distance he wouldn't have if he revealed a secret. He raised his head and looked hard at each of them. Apparently, risking your life alongside other people tended to give you a sense of camaraderie with them. Somehow, he had come to care about each of these people, even Natasha and Clint, and even Steve, whom he didn't know as well as the others. But that would have to stop. He couldn't do it. If he told them, even if all his aforementioned fears were unfounded, there would still remain the fact that Tony, if no one else, would never let him go. Heck, the billionaire would probably follow him to Antarctica when Harry left, and the alternative, staying and watching the others grow old, outliving even Thor, was not something Harry could stand. So, all was its gone. He lied easily, ignoring the pain twisting his heart when he noticed that no one looked skeptical, only interested. It's sort of a safety measure for us, but it's not well known, and only the most powerful could do it. Not all the time, either. Basically, my magical core placed my body in a healing stasis before I died, which then healed me while I was, well, dead. It's complicated to explain, but it takes a lot of energy, and if I had shot off a few more spells during the battle, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. His explanation was met with smiles and questions, and he did his best to fabricate answers for them. Let them think he was just a normal wizard. Let them smile at him without worry. It would at least give him a few more years to spend with the Avengers before he had to move on.